He carried one and got back to his feet quickly and looked to his left and didn't have a winger.
Lolasio is having a night. He really is. And Gatlin looks on forlornly. And the crowd have had enough. It's 11 straight losses for Wales.
2 down, 2 to go. The Wallabies on track for an incredible Grand Slam here. And look, who could possibly believe it a couple of months ago? But a 52-20 victory by the Wallabies today, Monday, Australian Eastern Daylight Time in Cardiff. I'm Christy Doran. Joining me to discuss all of this is the boss of the roar.com.au, Tony Harper. Harps, welcome on in.
Hey, thanks, Christy. Look, it might be the 4 coffees I've had since 3 a.m. Local time, but I'm a bit tingly. I'm a bit buzzy this morning. That was something special to watch again, twice in a row. Like what are we watching here? What is happening?
What is happening? Well, it's an incredible little run. We've got to say that. It's only been 2 test matches. They did get hammered in the Rugby Championship, but very quickly this narrative has swung, hasn't it, Harps? And tries are being scored, 8 of them in total today, and there's a buzz in the air, and it's not just because of Joseph Akustu-Suaalii being in the game, but the Wallabies are actually making a dent a few months out before the Lions arrive on Australian shores. And
to me, the moment was Len Ikitau just bursting out laughing as he did a bit of razzle-dazzle to beat his man there on the line and go over for a try that he obviously enjoyed a great deal, didn't he? But that was just kind of an explosion of joy that we've not been used to. 5 losses in the Rugby Championship, as you mentioned, and where's it all going? We're heading over for a Grand Slam tour, and a lot of us are saying, why are we even talking? We're halfway through. We're 50% through. We're en route.
50% through, and it's hilarious when you think about a month ago, Lord Laurie Fisher came out and said, we're going over to win the Grand Slam, and no one could believe it. People were going, hang on a moment, why are you saying this? This sounds ridiculous. But I'll tell you what, they're going to head to Scotland knowing that 2 years ago they beat Scotland in the first match of their end-of-year spring tour or Autumn Nations series, however you want to call it. Dave Rennie was the man in charge. Well, scroll forward 2 years, no Rennie, no Eddie Jones, but Joe Schmidt's just brought this pragmatism to the game, and you can see the absolute detail in what they're delivering out in the field. Before we break it down, let's just go through a couple of the run sheets. 8 tries, hat-tricks to Matt Fesler and to Tom Wright, a first half 50-metre effort from Nick Frost, and as you made mention, Len Ikitau scoring late, smiling, having a way of a time. Emphatic, wasn't it? It didn't always look like that, not at half-time anyway, because after racing out to a 19-0 lead, it did start to go a bit pear-shaped, Hubs.
Yeah, and it's at that point where you start to think, and Michael Hooper, who's obviously been in charge or at the helm for a lot of gut-wrenching losses along the way, how he mentioned how, it wasn't a case of them thinking, oh, no, they're coming back at us. Then we had the card as well that we'll get to. But they didn't get down on themselves, and they maintained their composure, held it together really well, and came back. But they were a class above. Wales, 10 defeats in a row, now a record 11th. They looked like a team that was completely dispirited. And the 19-0, they did respond well after going down 19-0 briefly. But Australia just had momentum. They had joy in their game. The Stan guys later after the game were talking about how it looks like a fun style of rugby to play, and they're on this wave of momentum at the moment, aren't they? And the tries are coming from everywhere. Matt Fesler, you mentioned, that's the first time a Wallabies hooker has ever scored a hat-trick of tries, and he basically downplayed it afterwards, saying they weren't his tries, they were his fellow forwards, which I guess you have to say, otherwise you'd cop a bit of a ribbing in his position. But they were just it was joy all around the field from the start as well. They really flew out of the gates.
There's some great storylines, and Matt Fesler is one of them. This is a guy that was playing in the Shoot Shield only a couple of years ago with Randwick. Then he got an opportunity under Brad Thorne with Queensland, and in a couple of years, he's scoring tries for fun for the Wallabies, and his set-piece work is outstanding. If we go back to some of the things that in the first half, the first 20 minutes, Wales looked at all at sea there. Defensively, they weren't aiming up. They weren't troubling Australia in attack, and they were breaking down like the Wallabies have broken down for years on years. And Nick Frost happened to be in the right place at the right time. Max Jorgensen swooping on the scraps on the deck, links up with Ikitau, and Frost runs away. And the Wallabies are up 12-0 inside as many minutes, basically. And then soon after, Fesler scores his first try around the 20-minute mark. It was an outstanding start that eased a lot of the fears that happens when there's 6 changes to a starting side. There was many more changes than people were expecting, a couple of them injury-related, 1 or 2 niggles in camp, but also wanting to see a bit. Samu Kerevi being one of them, with Suwali dropping back. But the 20 minutes between 20 and 40 is probably we should dig into a little bit, because Scotland will look at that, Ireland will look at that, and they'll go, hang on a moment, this Australian side, they can be broken down. And it was the scrum that where the Wallabies struggled, and it allowed, it wasn't just Tom Wright dropping a kick restart. It was the pressure that was put on Angus Bell at the scrum time, and Scotland and Ireland will be going, we've got to hit the Wallabies and stop them before they get going, and that starts at the set piece.
Angus Bell, I mean, everyone's been raving about him as a potential world-class player and possibly the best prop, in a few years going around. But he had 17 carries. That side of his game was strong as ever. But you're right, in the scrum, I mean, have you felt that scrummaging has been a weak point to that extent that you saw tonight? Because it kind of surprised me just how clearly he was blown away, and he was hooked at half-time for James Slipper just to try and bring a bit of stability back into there.
Yeah, well, I wonder if he was hooked, or if it was also you're not having a great night, but also you played 70 minutes the week before, and we've got to manage some of those minutes. So there's probably 2 arguments there, and probably in the middle. But if there's one area, I'm not going to say it's his Achilles heel, because he can scrum, but if there's one area that Angus Bell definitely needs to work on, it's his scrummaging. He's a 23-year-old. He's got years ahead of him, obviously, but he won't be considered world-class as a prop until he can actually scrum consistently, like the Springboks, like an Ox, Anisha, or a Franz Malhalber. Obviously, on the other side of the scrum is Franz, but until you can be so consistent with your set piece, your core role, you can't be considered world-class yet. So, yeah, there was a couple of penalties that he gave away there. There was a no-arms tackle, and it was a bit of the momentum from that, Nick Frost pinged for offside, and Gareth Anscombe just managed to chip away quite nicely there to get the score back to 19-13 at halftime. So there was a lot of work to do in the second half, Harps, and it didn't start well, did it?
No, it didn't start well, and that was a decision that's the decision against Samu Kerevi, which has shaken a few people up. I'm keen to get your impression on it. I know Andrew Mertens in Stan was quite adamant that TMO had no idea what was going on with it. We've seen a lot of debate around the 20-minute red card as well, and how that kind of played a role in this. I mean, the good thing was that, having had that happen, the Wallabies didn't fold from there, and in fact they went on and scored 6 minutes after and kept going and piled on another try in that period as well, while we were sitting there waiting for the decision as to whether it would be upgraded. But yeah, your thoughts on whether that's a legitimate upgrade? Like, yellow to my eye appeared pretty fair there, but obviously what's your thoughts on that one?
For those who didn't see it, 42nd minute, first base from a line out. Jack Morgan carries the ball into contact. Samu Kerevi looks like he's in a good position, and he ends up going up. So he's bent at the knees, but he ends up going up, powering up through the hips, and he makes contact, I thought originally around the shoulder. I thought it was just a strong tackle. And then you do see that there is some head contact. It's where the first point of contact is. Nonetheless, I think there's mitigation involved. Justin Harrison said it at the time. He admitted, and he said, yellow card. He had enough time, Kerevi, to stay lower. I agree. I think it could have been. I think it was a yellow card. There was. It wasn't reckless. Was it dangerous? Almost. But I think there was enough mitigation there, and that's what people like Andrew Mertens are talking about. And I'll bring in what he says, because I think it is really important. He goes, "I've kept my silence for long enough. Here at the ground level, it was really pronounced that Morgan dropped his height going into that tackle. Kerevi had no time to adjust there, and I just think that we're penalising players where they can't actually do anything." He adds, "I'm not going to go back over that decision. Eventually, someone's got to say the Emperor's clothes. Emperor's got no clothes, or more accurately here, the TMO's got no idea." I am more on Merton's side here. I think that that's a yellow card.
And it can have a massive impact on Kerevi, right? So you would assume that's a ban for the next game. He was never playing in the game against Ireland anyway. He's 31 years of age, playing in Japan. Joe's shown a commitment to local talent in the home test. So could this be one that really seriously derails his career? Do you think perhaps the Wallabies have any case to fight this one or to argue it? And what's the opportunity for them to do that?
Yeah, a couple of things. So Joe Schmidt's already indicated that he found it disappointing, and he indicated that the Wallabies officials will challenge this call. So that could be a couple of days away. In the short term, what we know and what we think we will know is that Suwali will come into the centres. He'll partner Lenny Katau. It probably frees up a spot on the bench for someone like a Harry Potter to perhaps debut. If he does, he'll be the 18th player. Josh Fluke joined the squad last week. Maybe there's room for Hamish Stewart to join from Australia A as well. But it's a big call on the context of Kerevi's career with Wallabies, because as you make mention, he's not just 31, but he's playing in Japan. If he was playing in Super Rugby, he'd be playing in front of Schmidt every week throughout Super Rugby, but he'd also be building partnerships, wouldn't he, with those around him that are going to make up the Wallabies side against the Lions next year. But I get the feeling like you look at what the side's going to look like for the Lions, but then you also then reassess what's the side going to look like 2 years down the track. So does Kerevi have enough of a runway to make a case for selection against the Lions? That's debatable. It's probably even a bigger leap to suggest that he'll be around in another 2 years after that to take on the world in a home World Cup in 2027, where he'd be 33. The legs are a little bit heavier, still probably in Japan. Is he in first division? All sorts of questions are left to ask and ponder.
Well, also with Suwali now expected to come in against Scotland, should play against Ireland as well. We're going to have and Lenny Katau, like we've spoken a bit about the disappointments of the card and Angus Bell, but it's probably time to shift gear, because this is a fantastic morning if you're a Wallabies fan, having watched them put 50 points on and turned it around from a 40-6 defeat at the World Cup a year ago, isn't it?
Extraordinary.
That's the centre pairing that we should now expect to ingrain themselves and be that first choice. And so whether Kerevi comes back anyway, whether he's even required in that role with those two emerging over the next 12 months or 6 to 8 months. But there were special performances all around, weren't there, really?
Totally, and we've got to remember Hunter Paisami's just had his second child just recently in the last couple of days. Does he feature going forward? He definitely will, but whether or not he can come back and immediately return to the 12 jersey, it's a big one. And Suwali's now probably got a chance to be able to further cement himself in a starting 15 position. And there was all sorts of questions around where Suwali might play for the Wallabies going forward, and even the Waratahs. Well, he might get the chance now to go, no, I'm an outside centre. So that's the big one. But you're right. For the second straight week, there were several players that stood up, and they probably didn't quite hit the same heights, I don't think, as a week earlier, where it was probably just Taniela that struggled. I don't think we saw the type of performance that were 9.5, 9s out of 10. We've got to remember this Welsh side's pretty poor at the moment, but we saw Alan Alatol play well. Faisler have a cracker. I think the second row combination with Will Skelton coming in provided a lot of physicality, but also they really complemented each other, I thought. You know, the heavy carries that Skelton would take where you would need a couple of people to bring him down. And then Frost, and we saw what he can do in a bit of open space. We saw them pick apart the line out as well, Frost, and then into Lukan Salakai-Loto. So they're some of the pleasing elements, and we're not even really talking about the back row, which is generally speaking where the Wallabies' stronger performance have been in 2024. So it was a really pleasing afternoon. Noel Lolesio built on the back of his performance a week earlier against England. Andrew Kellaway was very safe. Jorgensen might have been beaten once or twice in the air, but he looks good with ball in hand. And then, of course, Tom Wright with 3 tries. He started it. He finished it. It was a quality afternoon for a lot of players.
Well, I thought Tom Wright was clear man of the match, and I think he stepped it up again. You know, you spoke earlier about the knock-on that led to a mini Wales revival there, but he had a hat-trick of tries. He broke the line 3 times, beat 5 defenders, ran 245 metres with the ball in hand, and he just looks unleashed. You know, he looks to be running with freedom. We've spoken and written so much about, you know, a big name NRL recruit. This guy came from the NRL as well. And he's just, I think his combination with Kellaway and Jorgensen, that back 3, that's a one that's really kind of developed. Jorgensen wasn't quite at the level he was a week ago, but you've got a real building blocks there in the back as well. That back line is starting to look really quite strong. And Noah had possibly one of his best games for Australia as well. So much to enjoy there. Back row wise, Fraser McWright made 22 tackles. There were only 2 Aussies in the top 10 of tackles because obviously we led the possession stat. Kellaway was 10th in that with 11. But you're right, there were just winners all around the field.
I'll tell you what. Great stats there, firstly, from you, Tony Harper. But secondly, the idea of running with freedom. When was the last time you could run with freedom?
I ski with freedom, but I don't run. I don't run. Right. If there's a train, I might run for a train.
I saw you hustle once or twice in France last year. Look, really good points about him being unlocked and unburdened, and I think that's what it is. But it's just maturity. He's now been a Wallaby for quite a few years, and we keep saying it. He's getting better and better, and it's no surprise. And this is where people often cards can be marked about players, and that can be too premature because Wallabies tend to be thrown in too early before they're properly developed. You know, you see Springbok players like Kurtley Aronza, he didn't debut for the Box until his mid to late 20s. Yet he looks like he's 22, but he'd been playing for 6-7 years before he, burst onto the international season. Like, that doesn't happen in Australia. You get 19-year-olds like Max Jorgensen debut, and it's always let's get them out there. And it's probably just because of the lack of absolute depth and talent across the board that Australia's forced into some of those decisions. But it's really promising to see all these players grow and grow. And even though I was at Cardiff 2 years ago, and he's got fond memories of the place. He was one of the reasons. Lockie Lonigan, Mark Nwanganiwasi, they absolutely starred in a comeback against Wales that ended Wayne Peeback's career with the Welsh. And you could tell that Lolesio, he looked comfortable out there, and that's what happens when you have positive memories to be able to draw and look back on. So great performance. And Wales are in a hole. We don't need to talk necessarily too much into that. I'm sure that will happen more with Dan Parks with the next pod around maybe even potential replacements for Gats. But if we look ahead to Scotland just briefly, you must be excited about this if you're an Australian fan. In a week's time, the Wallabies will head to Scotland 2 from 2, knowing that a Grand Slam is there, right perhaps for the picking, if they continue to do what they did over the last 2 weeks.
They've got confidence now too, which we haven't often seen in the last couple of years from a Wallabies team. They must be absolutely buoyant after racking up 52 points, after a record score against England the week before. They're scoring for fun, and they don't normally go into runs of these games like that. And they'll really put pressure on Scotland too. And I think that, they've got a squad in a good place. The coach is using his talent well. He's making the changes he needs to keep them fresh, but also to keep that competitiveness within the ranks. They're combining well together. I mean, wake me up, Christy. Is this a dream?
I'm not going to say it yet. And I know that we've kind of been getting there. There's still a long way to go. These are probably two of the tougher tests. England, obviously, to get on the horse and then stay on the horse now, that's a really promising thing. But Scotland will be tricky. They've got some threats. They've just had another big win, this time over Portugal, but they managed to give a lot of guys rest, and they'll go in there really fresh. Perhaps they're not quite as match hardened, which could be a benefit for the Wallabies, but it's difficult. I'm excited, though, because I think there's a massive opportunity there, and that's why every Aussie rugby fan should be excited too, because they've managed to do what they don't generally do, and that's consecutive victories and backed it up. And if they can do it again, wow, they'll have the whole nation going to Dublin with them. Hey, Harps, I reckon that's just about a wrap, and it might have been one of the more swift, polished ones, which is kind of remarkable since I've been up since 1:30 a.m. with the Aussie A side not getting up over England, but then into
I think before we duck out, and I didn't get up for that game. Perhaps you could give us a quick kind of spin through of what happened there.
Well, 10-5, they lead Australia A at halftime, and then I would say the wheels, they didn't completely come off, but discipline let them down, drop balls, and then just pressure from England A. They win 38-17. The moment that sealed it was when Muir, the replacement outside back, read Jock Campbell like a book, plucked out an intercept, and went from a 24-17 lead after 67 minutes to 31-17, and then it was game, set, match. So there weren't a huge amount of players, I think, that really stamped their mark, their card, but it was nonetheless big minutes for guys like Massimo DeLutis, who probably played more minutes than I expected, and he's a player that you should be really excited about going forward. The big one is Taniela Tupou. Do we see him against Scotland next week? Carrying a bit of a knee injury. I don't think he should have been going on this tour given his knee issues. He was advised not to, ends up going on the tour. Big call if he comes back, because he had his worst performance in a long time against England last week, has the week off against Wales. He's an important one.
Just also on next week, do you see a place at all for Tane Edmed in the next two tests? Because I just wonder whether he might have, Joe's made some great selections, but whether it might have been better for Australia and Edmed if he'd been seconded to that Australia 15 rather than sitting there in the stands watching the past two tests. And, Noah has developed well. There's nothing been wrong with Donaldson. Do you see Tane actually getting a run on this tour from here?
Good question. If it could come down to next week's result, I don't think you can throw Tane Edmund in there just yet. They've got as much as Joe Schmidt wants to work out if some players can play, you've got to keep these combinations going, don't you? All the Sarah's in some good form. You've got to keep that going. I don't know if Tane, if they were to stumble at Scotland, I think you give him a crack off the bench a week later. But for now, I think you've got to keep it going and ride this momentum.
I'm riding the momentum.
Oh, yeah, baby. All right. On that note, thanks for joining us on the Roar Rugby Podcast. Please check out the website at roar.com.au. So much coverage is up, including Jeff Parks' wrap this morning, but myself, Tony Harper, with plenty of copy. Dan Parks next on the podcast. I think we might also have another special guest lined up too. So please get on and rank us, rate us what you think on these various platforms where you can give out marks and so forth. We love giving you these podcasts and trying to bring you up to speed with what's happening in the rugby world. Okay, until next time, thanks for joining us. I'm Christy Doran. You've been listening to the Roar Rugby Podcast.